Alright guys, I wanted to make a little review video for you guys. This will be talking about what we talked about today with flux and components. And what I want to do is I want to show you some slight naming changes that I've made, but bring in the clicker component. I want to make the isEven component like we did today, and I want to go ahead and make the reset component that I mentioned as well today. So that way this weekend, as you're playing around with this, you have an example and a discussion walking through it. Since it is late, I don't plan on doing any editing on this, so hopefully I won't sneeze or stutter too much. So what do we have? We have Atom open. I have the browser window open. I have Webpack running, showing nothing so far. And I have some pretty pictures. So let's get started. For the first change, I want to bring in the sample component clicker that is in the template that you are now familiar with. So import clicker from JS samples clicker.jsx. And then I don't really want the header or the paragraph, so I'm going to get rid of those and just have the clicker there inside this wrapper div. I've saved it. Webpack has now updated. I see my clicker, and now I can click on it, and it does indeed work. Yay. So let's talk about it. We have two bits to this. We have the clicker itself, and we have the store that the clicker is using for its state. So what we want to move away from in React is for keeping all of the state, managing the state in a component. That's what we want stores for. And our big three words here are, I guess, four: state and store. So stores manage state. And there are components. That's our other one. And finally, there's actions. So actions are used or triggered by components. So a component triggers an action. It updates the state. When the state gets updated, the store will then let the component know, and then the component will get the state and be updated. So it's component does an action. This changes the state. When the state changes, the store lets the component know, and it's updated, and that's the cycle. So let's start with the component itself. It is declared here, as we've discussed. The only required function you must have on a component is a render function. So here it is, down here, the render function. It has a div, and when the div is clicked, then it will call a function called Onclick. Now we can see that we brought the clicker store into the clicker component right here on line 2. So line 2 is bringing the store in, and so we use this in a few places. First of all, we are going to get a copy of the state from the store in the constructor so we can set and have an initial state. Also, when the component is done mounting, we will add a listener to the store so that whenever the store changes, we will be notified. This component will know it, and we'll get the state right here in this parameter, and we'll call setState. And calling setState here in the component will cause the component to re-render with the new state in place, and we'll see changes. And so in the render, we see that this .state.count is rendered out, and so whatever is in count, that is what will be in the DOM that is output from this. And whenever someone clicks, it goes store, it goes actions, and increment. So it calls the increment function or increment action for that store. So going to the store, I've got it divided into two pieces. One is the store part, and the bottom part is the actions down here. So with the store, there's a bit of state here, and it only has one value. It is an object with a property of count, with a value of an integer which defaults to 0. The store itself keeps track of any listeners and any actions. So the listeners are the functions that will be essentially called whenever the state changes, so any components can be notified that state changed. And actions are things that components can call to change the state of the store. And they can't directly interact with the state. They have to call the actions. So the actions are the arbiters here. They stand between the components and the state, not allowing the components to change the state directly. On the store, we have a function called addListener, and so this is how a component can add a listener function for whenever the state changes. And a copy state function, this will take whatever's in the state and will copy so anybody can use it. But since it is a copy and not the actual state, no one can change the state without calling the actions. Whenever any of the actions fire, they're going to call this changed function. And this changed function will get a copy of the state, will loop through all of the listeners that are attached for this store that want to know about any updates to this store. So it will listen to, it'll loop through all the listeners and call each listener and pass in the copied state. And then finally, the one action at the bottom, when someone calls increment, it will increment the count by 1 and then call the changed function, and the changed function will then loop through the listeners as we just discussed and notify them. And that's it. So in terms of the flow, this is basically how it works. Now the pretty picture. So we have a clicker component, which is in blue, and my green store, which is green. This is the clicker store and the clicker component. First, the component will get the initial state. Then the component will add a change listener so that it will get notified of any future updates to the state. And then if someone clicks on the button, it will fire the action, and then the state will get changed, and then the component will be notified, and then it will update. So let's look at the page. I'm going to refresh it again, start it at 0. As I click, this calls the increment function or the increment action, and that increments the count. And then once the count has been incremented, the listeners all get fired, and there's only one listener in this case. It's the listener for the component. So once again, a quick look at the component. When it's first constructed, we get an initial copy of the state. It has a count of 0 in that object. We get an initial copy of the state. We are going to set up a listener right here so that we get notified whenever the state changes. And then finally, after rendering at some point, when somebody clicks on the div, it will call the Onclick function, which calls the increment action. The increment action is here at the bottom, and so it comes in, it takes the state count plus 1, and so it's 0 at first, and then this will then therefore be 1. It calls the changed function. The changed function goes through, gets a copy of the state, loops through all the listeners, and calls them one by one, and that's how we get this fabulous functionality right here. Okay. Now let's make another component. This is the isEven component. The thing you want to think about in React is you don't want to try to bundle up all things into one big component. React is really good about making small components. And so this isEven component, I could bundle it in here inside the clicker, but there's really no compelling reason to do so. It's actually really easy to make a new component, and that'll allow us to focus on just that when we're messing with it. So let's create a new component. We're going to create in the samples a new isEven.jsx component. Import React from React, as we have been doing. Class isEven will be the name of our component. Extends React.component. And we need to have the only function that a React component must have, which is the render. So we're going to return some dummy HTML and get this hooked up. So isEven right there. So we have our component, but nobody can see it until we export it. isEven. I've saved that. Now it's usable by somebody else. Let's go to the index page, bring it in, import isEven from samples isEven.jsx, and try to put it on here on the page, isEven, and let's see what we find. I've saved it. Don't see any problems in Webpack land. Refresh the page. I have my isEven component. Okay. Step one. What I want to do is do just like we did with the clicker and get some initial state for our component. So, as we did in the clicker, here's the clicker. As we did in the clicker, we need a reference to the store. Here it is, reference to the store. So we'll go and create our constructor function. We're going to call this.state here in a second. So before we do this, we need to have a super. We're going to say this.state, just like we did in clicker. It's going to be store copy state. There we go. And so in the render function, what we want to do is we want to specify if this is even or not. So let's create a variable and say, call it is, or even value, whatever. And we're going to say it is even by default. Now we're going to look at the state. And so if state.count modulo 2 not equals 0, then it's actually odd. So we will change the text. There we go. And then we can include that in the rendered output. Create some mustaches, put this in there. Now let's see what happens. Webpack shows no problems yet. Oh snap, I have caused a problem. This makes me very sad. So there's an internal error in the React performance measurement code. Did not expect component did mount timer to start while render timer is still in progress for another instance. Reference error state is not defined. Okay, so state is not defined is on line 15. So I need to look at this.state. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to hope that the other error goes away. I actually don't know what that is. Hey, sweet, it went away. Yay, look at that. So it is even. At the very least, if you do a modulo on 0, modulo by 2, it will return back 0. So hey, we're good. It is being considered even right now. So now, as we click, we will see that nothing changes. The it is even message stays it is even when the number's odd. And the reason why is we've got the state when we initially created the component. However, we're not listening to changes. So we can look and see what the clicker component did, and we can actually do the exact same thing it did right there with no changes whatsoever. Because of the weird changing of this, what we're going to do is we're going to store this in a variable called self, and then we will add a listener. We'll say store.addListener, and this store right here is this right here that we imported. So store.addListener, and pass in a function so that whenever the store changes, the state will be passed in, and then I will call setState. And then when setState gets called, render will be recalled so that the page can re-render. or at least the component can re-render, and then it will go through this logic we had a second ago. So I will save it and see no Webpack errors, and I hope this works better than the last one did. So there we go. It is even, it is odd, it is even, it is odd, it is even, it is odd. So, hey, that worked out pretty well. And so this is like the other one in that it gets initial state and it adds a listener, but it doesn't ever change it. So let's look at our pretty picture. We've now added an isEven component to the mix. It is also looking at the store for its state. It does two things. It will get the initial state, and it will also listen for changes. It won't do any clicking action or anything like that. It's just looking at state. That's all it's doing. So it'll get it initially, and then it will watch for changes. So let's make a third component, which we will call reset. Hey, look at that. There was a problem in my name for my component, and I'm not going to edit it out because it's late. Okay, so we want a reset component. So I will go and create a new one. Reset.jsx, import React from React. Well, we're going to need the store here, so let's import the store. Okay, class reset extends react.component. And we start with the function that all React components must have, and that is a render. So we will return div. There it is, reset, and nobody can see it because we haven't exported anything, so module exports equals reset. So I think this is probably ready to put on the page. Import reset from JS samples reset.jsx, and let's put it on there. Reset. Webpack shows no errors. As we know, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Okay, there's reset. Click me, still works. isEven, is odd, still works, and so all that's cool. Reset does nothing. So the reset button, or reset div, it doesn't actually care about initial state. And it also doesn't care if there's any updates. All it is there for is whenever you click it, it resets the state. So that means we're going to need an Onclick event. So let's say Onclick equals function. Okay. Now, because of this changing out from under us, we will say var self equals this. And we will say self.onClick. And this should work for us on click. And this underscore is just a convention. It is not actually required. So let's sanity check, see if this works. Webpack not screaming at us. All right, I'm clicking reset. Sweet. Now what I need to do is I need to reset the store. Now I can't just grab the state because that's not allowed. Won't work. We need the store to give us the ability to reset because an increment function is never going to reset. And so this means we're actually going to make a slight change to the store itself. So how do you do this? You create a new action, just like this. And we'll call it reset equals function. And state.count equals 0. because that's what it means to reset it. At least that makes sense to me. And call changed. And maybe we're done with that. So let's go to reset and say store.actions.reset. Save it. Webpack looks fine. So click it a few times, get it up to some number, and then reset it. Get it up to, let's make sure it's odd, and then reset it. So awesome. Okay, so let's look at our picture. So we have a clicker store, and this clicker store holds the one source of truth, the data for all clickiness. And so all the components around the clicker or the clicker data all look to that store. And so if any one of them makes a change, the clicker, whether it is incrementing or the reset, whether it is resetting, everything gets updated. Now the reset doesn't care about updates, and so it doesn't register any events. It's not technically necessary because it doesn't need it. But the clicker, because it shows the count, does need it, and the isEven does also need it. And so this pattern gives you an easy way of being able to create as many components as you want without having any of the components have to know about each other. You should notice that the clicker doesn't know anything about the isEven component. The isEven component doesn't know anything about the reset component. You can come and create another component that calls either of those two actions, or even maybe you need another action that you can call. That's fine. You can do that, and it doesn't increase the complexity of all the other components because none of them are connected at all. They are all connected to the store. When the store changes, everything changes. It's a very nice application pattern. This gets back to that circle. An event happens, you change the data, then the DOM re-renders. In the React model, that's you have a React component, an event happens, so you perform an action. The action changes the store, and then because the components are listening to events of the store changing, they automatically get updated, and the circle begins again. So that's it. I'm going to check this in and end this video and edit nothing out. Good night, everyone.